А це прямий ефір чи запис?
Так.
Прямий, да, прошу.
Доброго дня.
Hello, dear viewers. Today, in our Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, such a loud name, we have geopolitical dialogues, at least one interesting dialogue, I promise you today. And this is a dialogue with a person who is always mentioned as the publicist, journalist, but actually I'm a political analyst. Yes, that is what we wrote today, and probably this is the debut of Vitaly Portnikov, who's mentioned as analyst here. So thank you very much, Mr. Vitaly. Thank you very much for invitation. So in our cooperation is in different formats with the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, I would like, before I'm going to ask my questions, I would like to mention a few words what I am interested of hearing today, because lately, and lately I mean more than a year for we've got already, but we have a lot of like sayings, or I can even say stereotypes about what is going to happen in the future, how the war will end, and what kind of negotiations will be there, what Ukraine has to do, and so on. We have a lot of expert groups that are working, and actually they are changing all the time, and some things, in my opinion, require some more, more detailed comment in order not to make some serious mistakes, even in definitions. Why now? I think that this dialogue will be really good at this time, because it's the first moment when we can say that diplomacy is coming back to the game. Because before, and actually this is still lasting, it is determined by the armed forces of Ukraine and the events that are happening on the front. Now we are coming up to the culmination, and these recent attempts of Russia to use everything they've got, the rockets that aren't hit, that cannot be destroyed, or some centers of decision making, it seems that we are coming to the certain part of these attacks, and this summer campaign on our fronts can show a lot of new things that can be taken later on into consideration by politicians and diplomats. And one more important moment, that those blades, like the well-known rockets, even before the full-scale invasion, Mr. Biden agreed with the journalist that yes, this kind of weapons are really difficult, and it was about the also nuclear threat, because this is a huge ballistics and so on, and this is a signal we cannot make escalation. That is, there was certain point, and I would like to talk about what's next, what we should take into account, because with these usual things we can lose this depth of the issue. I would like to start with, I've been asked a lot of times, I've been asked abroad and in Ukraine in such dialogues or in such discussions, there is always I highlight in three stereotypes. The first one, or the phrase which is used by almost all the experts, 90% of politicians, peace still will come, the war will be over, and it means that negotiations are necessary. Nobody is considering other scenarios. So the first stereotype, that everything will end with negotiations. The second one is a constant topic of intermediaries. So this is the second thing which is being discussed. And the third one that comes up around that is, it's not really stereotype, but it's a constant discussion. Can Ukraine just make some steps towards that? If we are talking about peace, I would like to start with the phrase, does the peace always come after war through negotiations? Is that the only one scenario, or there can be something else? In order to answer this question, Mr. I need to we need to figure out what the sides of the parties of this conflict really want. Those who are involved into the military actions and also intermediaries, real and imaginary. And I have clear ones, and I want us to understand that clearly. The first moment is what is really wanted by Russian Federation, headed by Vladimir Putin, and what Russian people would like to have if they were not just performing the tasks that are set in front of them by the state, because we know that Russians now don't have the subjectivity. And bigger problems can happen as soon as they get it, because political subjectivity of the Russian people, as they are right now, are much more reactive than the subjectivity of the president of Russian Federation. This also has to be recognized. So Russian Federation wants, so to say, come back to Yalta. I mean, they want to mention those summing up of the victory that was achieved on the 9th May of 1945, according to the Soviet version, and it was approved by those who were in anti-Hitler coalition. So this is coming back to the borders of 1991, maybe not Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia that are parts of the European Union. And this is the field of impact of the Soviet Union at the times of the end of the World War II. And this is what was written in the Guarantees of Safety, which was signed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia before Russia attacked Ukraine. You remember the agreement? Yeah, the draft agreement guarantees that the ex-Soviet republics will never be members of NATO. That is, nobody is going to be responsible for them. And those that are already included to NATO, those are Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, they cannot place some recent weapons of NATO. So they should know their place. So it should be a buffer sanitary zone between this big Russian Union, let us say so, and Western Union. What about Finland? It was also Yalta. So Finland, at the moment when Russian Federation was coming with their proposals, it was a neutral state. Now it can be involved into the zone of non-placement of new weapons. So no contradictions are here, because Finland is not part of Russian Empire at the time of 1945. It was part of it in 1917. They did not come to that yet. I will repeat myself, they live in the paradigm of 1945, and all the time they are just stepping back somewhere. So they will maybe want one day to come back to their borders of 1917. But Ukraine is just a small part of their ambitions. It's not of least importance, but not of the highest importance. So if we are talking about Russia from Uzhhorod to Ashgabat, then probably the first part of this, from the point of view of Russia, here they are related only with Europe, but there are also parts where they stick with China. And we are not talking about achieving the aim, but we are talking about the aim that they set in front of themselves, an integration of Moldova or Belarus till 2030. It's about this version, first. Second, what does Ukraine want? Ukraine wants to be an independent country and sovereign country which has the right to make own choices, which exists in its borders that are the borders of the ex-USSR. And for us, at least before the February 24th, both European Union and NATO were not really the issue of values, but it was the protection from Russia, because they want to not let us make free choices. So now only European system and NATO are the system of values for us, because it's the fighting for values from the system of European right. And NATO still from the point of view of protection, of safety. Of course, but we understand that there is a readiness of society to help. Again, everything is happening within the NATO. So this is the second thing. This is what fully contradicts the interests of Russian Federation, and actually it makes it the thing that cannot be achieved in the nearest time. What is wanted by the USA and other countries, they want to come back to international law. So that countries that exist right now on Earth, they respect international law. And roughly speaking, the one that was after 1945, which doesn't allow the opportunity when one country joins the territory of the other country. Because Western world was really calm to unresolved conflicts on the ex-USSR before the annexion campaign started. But we lived with the Karabakh and with different cities, and nobody hurried to resolve these conflicts. Nobody was imposing sanctions, and nobody was saying that for the territories of Georgia, Russia should be excluded from the Group of Seven. So actually, it's not only the big invasion, but also the Crimea became the conscious event. So if they are not saving the international law, then it can end up in the Third World War. So the world wants that Russia, not only Russia, but those states that have similar opinion as Russia, they refuse from joining the territories of other countries to them, not even pressure on other countries, not even creating some like political sphere of impact, supporting of pro-Russian forces and so on, but this kind of humiliation and neighboring countries. So this is what is required by the West, the Western countries. And how? What about these goals? Let us also determine the fourth goal. Chinese People's Republic. What do they want? They want to create a multipolar world, or maybe two. I guess, yeah, two-polar world. You are totally correct, Mr. Ambassador, because they will decide, they want to decide what is international law. So actually, Chinese People's Republic is not that interested in renewing the borders of Ukraine and not that much in Russia to make this conflict to their benefit, but they want to prove that without their participation, without their accepting, not a single conflict in the world can be resolved. So like Washington and China, they can sit and say how geopolitical map is going to look like. This is the task of China, which is not the same with the task of the Western countries, because this world is not bipolar or it's not multipolar, but they want to have the prevailing countries right now, like right now. Yeah. So this is our huge problem, because actually we understand that with this different aiming of tasks, this conflict, not even Russian-Ukrainian war, because I will repeat myself, this is just a small fragment of the conflict, but so to say, it's the shooting from the pistol, just like it happened in Sarajevo earlier on. So here, we are not the epicenter, but it's a small Serbia, you know. Everybody feels sorry for it, but it does not determine how the world is going to look like. But it's more like how can we stand for certain principles and values, and Ukraine is just the arena for those values and principles. And later on, corresponding to like whether Ukraine dies or wins, we will have to fight for that on other platforms. I am sorry. Can such comparison with Serbia has the right for existence? Because still Ukraine is the biggest territorial country in Europe, and with the population before many people left Ukraine were forced to do that. Serbia was ex-Yugoslavia, and it was not really the modern Serbia. It was the Serbia that became Yugoslavia. Yeah, but still, without comparison, actually, as of now, you think that there is no such subjectivity of Ukraine, but we can see externally different things. Ukraine has moral authority. This is how the 21st century is different from the 20th century. So you think it's limited in time and it won't be perceived as that for a long period of time. No, I'm talking about the fragmentation of events, but the fact that events of the 21st century differ from the 20th century, it's obvious. And the authority of Ukraine is also obvious. We can see that when Ukrainian president or other Ukrainian authorities are making speeches with a foreign audience, it has its impact. In Serbia in 2014 and Ukraine in 2023, they have more objectivity than subjectivity, but more people are listening to Ukraine than they were listening to the Serbia in the past, because it was the World War and people know how big wars end. People are different. And by the way, there was also the First World War, and people know what it means to have suffering of many people. People know how the wars are ended. They know that after that there are dozens of years of problems and economic problems, and humanity has this experience already, and they are divided into those who are conscious that this experience should not ever be repeated, and it ends with the people speaking Russian that it can be repeated. So exclusively that we are only at the beginning of the huge events, and Ukrainian and Russian war can be just forgotten if we don't prove the whole civilized world that Ukraine was the arena of this war, because otherwise it will be forgotten as something episodical, because the number of losses that were there and that can be suffered by Ukraine in the future cannot be compared with the scale of new conflicts that can be on the continent. So do I understand you correctly that these different goals, different interests, at least those that you mentioned, still as of today, I would not exclude Ukraine? Yeah, I mentioned Ukraine. Yeah, it's good that we have such opportunities that have to be implemented, of course, still, but at the same time, these different goals exist, and somehow everybody says that there will be negotiations, but when people are talking about negotiations as the only scenario possible, somehow nobody recalls that there are other cases. I don't think I should remind of the previous centuries, but whether we want that or not, we are still coming to that. I would like to say that not every war is ending with a victory. Yeah, quite a lot of serious conflicts are still unregulated with a formal peace agreement. And actually, yeah, even more than that, under the conditions of such conflicts, those, for example, Southern Korea or situation on the Cyprus were developing, and I am not even talking about the previous periods. And this is also the issue about Japan and Soviet Union and Russia, Israel and Arabic countries, because they did not have peaceful agreements for 3 dozens of years. And at the same time, no one is making a call to urgent negotiations that would end the war with a peaceful agreement. Nobody is making pressure on them. Nobody is saying that you should, nobody is saying to Israel that you have to give the Palestine the right to create something, and they are not telling Palestine that you have to see that they have right for existence, otherwise we won't provide you with humanitarian aid. They are saying that you will have the opportunity. Please find this factor of agreement, but we will help you meanwhile. Israel is a really classical example of the country which had been living under the conditions of war all the time. Okay, Southern Korea. Yeah, I did not really like one moment, but I would like to hear your opinion, because you are taking these things and you are imposing that on Ukraine. But lately, under the so-called Peace with Plus, we have the 38th parallel that we can come to freezing war, so to say, and postponing this decision for later, or maybe we can coexist in this manner, and automatically we are also postponing that, and we are talking about gurus of diplomacy, international policy. I would like to say, and I wanted to hear your opinion about that, how do we treat such assessments and examples of the past to today's situation if this is mentioned by really like wise people, beginning with those who are well known here in Ukraine, because actually in Ukraine we have a small group of people who are well known, and I will name those with whom I managed to talk about these issues personally. These are Henrik Issenger, who is a guru of diplomacy, and his classical work, Diplomacy, is a handbook that should be next to you in order to understand what kind of examples were there and how the events took place. But he, having like next week 100 years, he is wise enough and flexible enough to change his opinion. Like, for example, he's been saying that NATO, it's impossible to go to NATO for Ukraine, and we have to forget about that. And now he says everything changed entering the NATO. And also we have Okuyawa, well-known philosopher. We've been talking to him, and he was also saying about the NATO that it's a bad idea. It did not happen long ago. It was end of 2021, and arguments in our communication could change nothing. And yesterday article, why Ukraine has to be in NATO. That is, how do we use examples or some kind of historical results of military conflicts? How do we take them to our attention? And should we really listen so much to EU and the most well-known people in order to just say that we cannot take the other way? I think there is a huge problem of any political thinking that diplomats, just like generals, they are getting prepared to the wars that already took place, but actually each conflict gives birth to a new decision. Like we are sitting right now, we are trying to find out some decision. If we are going to make decisions taking into account the previous conflicts, we are going to go to the dead end. What do I mean? When the situation is compared to Korea, I also say that there is like theoretical opportunity of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Maybe it can be achieved via this, or it can be done with the Ukraine and so on. Just as an example of the grain agreement, yes, but we always have to remember that this kind of Korean option, it existed there then when actually behind the Southern Korea, there were countries with a mandate of the UN, and they had nuclear weapons. And it was the mistake of the Soviet Union, as the Security Council of the UN. And those were mistakes of the last period of life of Joseph Stalin. Why? Because he believed into power, and to a great extent, Korean War ended just because he died, and not because the solution was found. If Stalin would have been alive, the events would have gone totally different way, because it was not the conflict that had to be ended. It was just means. And only the ancestors of Stalin, they just decided that this war is not necessary because they had different point of view. They did not want to have such a harsh model of competing with the West that could lead to the Third World War. And Mr. Joseph Stalin, who was ready to sacrifice any amount of people, he was ready for the Third World War. So this is what is very important. So he was the head of the totalitarian state. Without Stalin's death and without the UN mandate, we would have never seen such an option of events which became the reason for stopping the fire. And now we have live Putin, and we don't have the UN mandate on Ukrainian land. So this is just the illustration. I would like to mention that people who are writing about this period, somebody is supporting your opinion, and somebody says that Stalin did not want to bring it to the maximal point of maximal fighting. So this is a bright situation when at least American scientist and Henry Kissinger, he is saying that Stalin was playing a game. He was putting his bits to the maximum, but again, he was respecting the power, and he was making a step back. So this happened, and not a single time. So when people are saying that Soviet Union or Russia will never step back, not a single step back, or the nuclear state cannot allow this, there's a lot of examples that the wars ended and there was a step back. Yeah, but how Henry Kissinger differed from Winston Churchill? Churchill always knew that such people as Stalin, if they are not stopped, they can go till the end. And Kissinger also thought that with such people as Stalin, you can agree. And that is why he made the biggest mistake in his political career, which costed the USA right now all those challenges, existential challenges that are there. I mean, the conditions of ending the war in Vietnam, and also the making peace between the Nixon's administration and the China. So this evidenced one more time that when diplomacy is headed by a cynical person who doesn't believe into this, they will bring their country to a dead end. So of course they need to get such a president, and Nixon was such a president. But the Southern Vietnam, which is still considered by many observers a huge achievement of American diplomacy, because this is how the war ended in Vietnam, it still costs people a huge number of victims, and it persuaded such countries as the People's Republic of China, or because earlier or later they will be able to take the people from the territories that they are defending. Yeah, but we understand the main reason that in democracies on different stages, America was also not perfect in different periods. Not today, but I would, I would discuss the values because they might be different, and the president of the USA also had his values. But in given case, we are talking more
тобто підходів Америки.
About isolationism and approach of America to different goals. They very often were saying one thing and they were doing the other thing later on. Yeah, that's true. But after the agreement of Kissinger and Central Secretariat, Mr. Lin Ho, each person who's trying to protect some democratic values and they don't have this power in their soul, there is always fear. What if Americans will behave in such a manner how they behave with the southern Vietnam and with the citizens, residents of Vietnam who do not want to live under North, and they are living under that for 50 years already? Yeah, the issue is, why do we start then? But in Washington, for example, when you're passing the memorials to those who died in the Korean War, in Vietnam, you understand why it happened. So actually, here are three reasons. So the generals and the military wanted to continue the campaign. They were ready. They were saying, we are ready to that. We have the possibilities. So the possibilities were there, but politicians made it in different manner. And at certain stage, the war became non-popular, many victims, many wounded, and the moment that you remember, yeah, I totally understand that it's an impact of the society. And here's the question. How do we, Ukraine, right now, how do we orient? The situation is such that the society is ready to go to victory strongly, and they understand the scale of our costs, of our expenses, not only infrastructure, let us be honest, because we are returning for in period, so it will throw us back from what could have been without war. But still people are saying we want to go till the end, we want to go to victory. And this is shown not only by sociology, but this is the mood of the armed forces also of Ukraine. Like, we don't want it last forever, to have some pause and then to fight for that again, in this sense. And also from the other side, there are constant negotiations and contacts on the highest level, on the high level abroad, of the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. And actually, how do you think still now, for our authorities, it's a really strong support? Can we hope that such mood of Ukrainians will remain, like this formula somebody made it in the White House, like, we are going to support you as long as possible? So will we have it for all the period of time that is necessary? It's an interesting question, because now we've been living in these conditions for 15 months, and 10 out of those, the fights are happening on localized part of the country. Let us recall that there was a certain period when Ukrainian troops had to fight the enemy on a huge perimeter of our borders. Russians had to leave from the north. Russians cannot attack on the south because they are just defending their positions. So the war is localized on the east of the country. You know, I'm a person from Kyiv. I don't really agree, because shellings of Kyiv with rockets, it mentally involved all of us into the situation. Yeah, but when you are shelled, it's not the same as when the troops are standing at your porch, because like in Kyiv, Vinnytsia, and Lviv, people are living under the threat of rocket hits, and in Kharkiv they are living under the other's threat, and it's totally different atmosphere. There are rocket hits, but they are much more intense and much more. Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, that is this like back of our front, who are close to that. Yeah, we also need to understand how people that are in this part of the country, they have totally different view of the war than people in the West. And I'm not talking about the East. And by the way, this opinion is different, because it says that people, to a great extent, they are leaving the territories to more safe part of Ukraine. And the person who's coming from Kharkiv to live in Kyiv, they won't say like, we are mentally worried for the rocket hit, because they know that rocket hit, it's when the rocket S-300 is in their house and there are dozens of victims, and it's totally different feeling of war, because the society that doesn't live under the condition of the real threat, everyday threat to their lives, there is certain, I would say, readiness to agree with the victims for a certain period. The issue is that if this condition preserves for quite a long time and there is no peace, then there is exhaustion of the situation. We want to release our territories, and just a year passes or 2 years, let us imagine that we came to the borders of Ukraine. This is the formula, official formula of the president of Ukraine. One of the points, fully deoccupy, and the war continues. The rocket hits continue, and there is still mobilization of citizens, maybe to a smaller extent, but people are dying every day on the state border. Russian troops are trying to attack. They succeed, they don't succeed. And our neighbors are saying, we want to see you in NATO, in the EU, after the end of war. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, 8, 9, 10 years. And always there is a question how the country will look like in this situation. Will there be some investments or no? Will they be on the limited territory, or we will have to agree that the huge 200-kilometer zone of the line after this border will be the zone where people won't live and there will be no industry and nothing, and it's the territory of the cities with millions of population. Will our marine ports be open, and does it mean that will our ports be alive still? again, under perfect conditions, because we are living in the situation of such, from the east and south, we are shelled by Russia. So this is all the question, and how the public will perceive that. And we don't even know whether we will be able to conduct elections, and we don't know how long people are going to live in the condition when they cannot leave the country, what will be with the social situation, how the depressed nation is going to look like. So these are the challenges that mean not less than war. That is why I think that this war is if he thinks that the time will help him win with any military solution of the situation, he's right. Yeah, but I would mention here that it also changes. And no matter whether he is, the truth is his or not, but the big question is whether he still will remain the president of Russia. Yeah, but for us, it will be the number of human losses. And I would like to say that a lot depends on the political will of the West. And I'm really happy that the West continues to raise their bids in this game, because countries should refuse doing that. Do you think that those are Western countries that are raising the bids? Because it seems that every time the bids were raised by Russia. Yeah, but as answer to their stakes, yeah, as the answer to that, why they never did that? I'm not even talking about the first period when they were afraid that Russia will use whatever they want, and there were such moods. Now we don't have these things. Unfortunately, they coped with that, and they were inspired by Ukrainian example. And by the way, it's been happening not even lately, but from the very beginning at the time. And that is why Rammstein was formed really quickly. And that is because all the time, we have this feeling of Kissinger. He believes into the sound mind of the partners. So they could not trust that Mao Zedong has no sense. So the question is that why, for not a single time, they never tried to avoid this step from Russia. Yeah, because they hope that Russia will see that there are no prospects. If you continue war, we will give something else. You do something and we will do something. You cannot do that endlessly. You have to think rationally, and you have to understand that still it's a trap for you. But they don't think rationally. Yeah, that's what we understand. Yeah, but that is clear. That is already clear. Everything, because these changes, they happen, and we can see that Russians, they understand that only force is respected there, and if you agree to their conditions, then you lose. And it seems that the basics are understood, but still they are holding their position. And I can understand those who are talking about escalation, and they are using the weapons of mass destruction. But I think that this clock to the catastrophe, it was more in the last year in March, not now. And I truly hope that Russians already understood, maybe from even Chinese people, that this story with the nuclear blackmailing will lead to nothing, because if they will increase the number of weapons, it won't lead to anything good. So now we had just this claim, the Netherlands and Great Britain, they are participating actively, although I think it could have been done half a year earlier. Yeah, everybody was shouting close the sky, but it's impossible. Why now is it possible? Why now it's possible? So the question is why I was always surprised, because actually earlier we succeeded in persuading Americans at least like I can give an example. This story, it's the first time when Russia was speaking in all the platforms that the weapons, like dangerous, like they are talking that this is lethal weapons, even though all weapons kill, but they were threatening. But nevertheless, America did not take the other steps. But for this step, like anti-vehicle weapons, I would like to say that these javelins and NLAWs, British, they were really helpful. And if they continue going this way, it's my subjective opinion, I don't think that Putin would have refused achieving his goals, but he would just stop a bit, because in 2021, he just stopped. Not a lot of people are discussing that he was ready to attack a year ago, and only negotiations with strong people of this world, so to say, and the steps that we were perceiving as something absurd here, it was part of the, so to say, like shadow agreement, the northern flow rebuilding, and also some interest in other regions. It did not stop his moving forward. And I think that the key reason is that part of these negotiations had to be a question of the umbrella of safety for Ukraine. Of course, in the perfect world, that is membership in NATO or provision of weapons before Putin will be ready for invasion. It was surprising, but I have to mention that in Ukraine also people were not ready for such approach. Yeah, but still you did not answer the question, like why the West is always reacting and not acting in advance. Maybe it's the public opinion issue. No, the public opinion is supporting, by the way, it's a unique situation because the public opinion in the USA and all the European countries, not only for the support of Ukraine, but also provision of weapons to Ukraine, went much further than the leaders of the countries. But from the other side, we can see the questioning in Germany that they think that Ukraine should not be the membership of NATO. They don't. They think that it should end at the table of negotiations. So they are supporting Ukraine, but they don't want to have their own risk. That is natural. Maybe Western politicians are acting in such a manner so that their people don't have this like opinion that like they're forced. Like, okay, you see how Russia is acting, like we have to react somehow. So Russia is in the role of a bad boy, and like we wouldn't have done that. We don't want to escalation. So West is kind of a side who doesn't want to have escalation, but they are forced to like reply to the escalation from the other side, and it means that their governments are not risking their own safety. I mean the of the people of the country. Let us not try guess what they are thinking, but at the beginning I can mention that, you know, they have really powerful computers in the USA that like you are putting there the scenario of war, and I was participating myself in such virtual resolution of conflicts. It is done on the high level. So there, everything is so clear. Like the number of tanks, the number of resources, the possibilities of the different sides, and there is no such factor as motivation. So there is a coefficient of like defense or attack, but the difference in national character, historical experience, specifics of the factors that are impacting that supercomputer is not taking that into account. Listen, it's not a secret that Americans were putting this model into their supercomputers, and this supercomputer just gave them totally different scenario than what happened, and totally different scenario about the Afghanistan. Yeah, okay. I would like to mention the other important moment still when we are talking about the formula of peace. And I think that everybody, like Ukrainians, more or less, they are perceiving this formula, and the president of Ukraine also mentioned that in his speech. And like the main issues are the main issue is the occupation of all the territory. Now we are talking about colossal change of approaches about the crime has to be deoccupied. And all the partners are mentioning that. And what you mentioned about the Black Sea, if we leave the control of Russia, we don't know the Turkish position that will be there, but from Mr. Erdogan, we saw what kind of position he has. We will see what happens after the second part of the election. So I think that if Erdogan remains, I don't think it will change dramatically, but they made it as though see of their own. Like when we are talking about the goals of war, by the way, the propagandist Lavrov also mentioned what are the goals in this war. By the way, it is not the same that Mr. Putin is saying. But Putin says, like, but still, we've got the territory. Like, with the happy glow in his eyes, like as though sea is ours. And indeed, how can Ukraine develop in this situation? So the logic tells us that we have to do that, at least the entering to Black Sea and safe trade. This is a natural interest of Ukraine. Yes, and part of peace is the right of Ukraine for actually accessing the ports and transporting by marine transport. So actually Ukrainians, they want to have fair solutions. And as we see, we want to have that in our internal policy, which can not correspond to institutional capacities of the country. Very often at certain stages of development, we know that perfectly that now it is transferred into external policy. And now important question is whether we can get this fair solution and whether there is fair solution in given conflict. Yeah, and it's very interesting that when these moments were mentioned at that time, they seemed for many people there in the West and in Ukraine, they are really like full of ambitions. They are optimistic because the occupation of all territories with the Crimea. So we can just imagine the powerful work of everyone in order to achieve that. So it is clear that now we have no other way, because we are underlining that both the freedom of navigation is also very important, because we are talking about a grain corridor and the fact that Ukraine has to supply food, but it's not happening in a great extent. But what made me sad, actually, I would like to mention, in Washington, we've been talking a lot about freedom of navigation. We've been talking a lot. We had many discussions. And also, if you remember that before the full-scale invasion, there were either the NATO ships or like other ships. And when the ship was going to the Black Sea and it had powers stronger than the powers of the Russian ships, we were calm. And here, like just before the invasion, they are taking their ships from Ukrainian ports, and the British ship could pass the Crimean, and Russian did nothing, but then they were provoking seriously. And actually, the issue of freedom of marine navigation, it came into some kind of agreements. But all the documents says that it should be ensured by international law. And if somebody is acting against the freedom of marine navigation, it requires the UN sanctions. I would like to see how other countries would have act, except for China, because they also don't want anybody to be there between Russia and China. But it sounds in some episodic things, Maybe we have to add safety of the Black Sea to this formula. to this Ukrainian formula. It should be the formula of peace for everyone. Yeah, it's obvious that without solution, our economy will be like degenerative, because we see what is happening with the agricultural products in Central European countries, and the situation won't improve. It will become worse, because we perfectly understand that Ukraine is a huge agricultural country, and if there is a certain part that remains in the Central Europe country, it contradicts to their producers of agriculture. And moreover, I think that as soon as we are integrated to the EU, we will face this challenge. But again, we can just bring our goods by sea. If we cannot do that, and we can do that only via the territory of our neighbors, they will make all the efforts in order for our economy to reduce in size. And we should not think that our good relationship with Poland or Bulgaria will save us from destruction. But no, in their economic interests, I mean, the agriculture, our destruction is in their interest. That is competition. If we are in the EU, then the rules of competition are totally different. That is why I think that the European integration of Ukraine is not the issue of the nearest time, because if we won't find the joint common language with the nearest countries, then they won't let us go there. We have to be optimistic, because if our government says that in 2 years we are in the EU, then yeah, I would like the Polish government to say that before the elections to the parliament. And I think that when in Aachen, our president, Mr. Zelensky, was talking to the prime minister, and he says like, Europe, it's -1 barrier. That's right, but the Warsaw doesn't believe in 2 tiers. And in addition to that, these countries, they received huge advantages. I would like, okay, we have to come to the issues of safety. We have to ensure like this marine navigation and the Crimea, which is actually the base, Russian base. And the question, I won't ask how realistic it is to return the Crimea. I think we will see. We will see. Yeah, I also think that before we see the military decision, it is not a good thing to consider that. But still, we have some questions for the future. It is clear that this freedom cannot be ensured if it's the air bombardier of Russia. Again, having no legal reasons for that. It's not a bad story that Russia destroyed itself all the reasons of the base being on our territory, even though in constitution it was not mentioned that it is forever. But now, for sure, now we have no reasons in order for their militaries to be in the Crimea. Moreover, they ruined everything else, right? So that is agreement on the armed forces in Europe and so on. Everything is ruined. It's bad, of course, but the war and all the safety format are ruined. We understand that if in the Crimea our Neptunes won't be there, we can talk a lot about like gas towers, but still we won't have this control. And in this sense, I have a question of totally different character. At the beginning of discussion, we still have to understand that the discussion started as follows. After the occupation, shouldn't we return the Crimea to become oblast? That is, to take off all the specifics, which, honestly speaking, was a compromise, not with the Crimean Tatars, but with the Russian Federation. Yeah, I remember the night when we were voting for the constitution in 1996, when we were standing there and we were seeing this kind of trading between inclusion of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the symbols of Ukrainian state. So a lot of things were there. It was in the interest of Russia in order to have the Autonomous Republic And it's logical that after the victory, the interests of Russia should be thrown away. But there are Crimean Tatars, and there's discussion. Let us narrow down in the constitution all these positions. What's your attitude to such development of events for a longer period? I mean, still, what kind of model will be there in your opinion, or should be? And second is, should we discuss this problematics right now, even without Crimean Tatars? We can and we should do that earlier on, and I think that we could have discussed that after 2014, but there are certain obvious legal things. First of all, the Crimean Soviet Republic within Ukrainian Republic, it was as a Crimean and Tatar autonomy. We can see that in the order of the head of Presidium. At that period, nobody was going to make Russian autonomy in the Crimea just because Russians and Soviet Union had their own subjectivity as Russian Federation. But Crimean Tatars had no subjectivity. Therefore, the idea of the Crimean Autonomous Republic within Ukraine, because we never had that. We had only Crimean Oblast. So the idea was that this autonomy has to ensure the Crimean Tatars returning to the Crimea. And it's just like they also ensure to other nationalities how they came back within Russian Federation to their own countries. The principle is the same, so that the people who used to live there, they come back to the place of their real residence and they get their opportunities for their own national and cultural development. Why actually do we have to take into account the idea of Russian Federation, Russians' vision of autonomous Crimea? Because we are talking about the right of protecting the rights of the local population. We don't know how this will look in the future, but they have their own rights. All the rights of local minorities are based on two rules. First, whether people have their own state or their minority in other countries. Secondly, are they protected from the point of view of culture? And third, are they the population that used to live there? So, for example, Crimean Tatars, they unfortunately, this is a group like the Karats and ethnic population when we are talking about Tatars, and no other motherland. They don't have any other motherland, and they are the population, the native population of this place. So they can look at the part of Russian national minority in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with the Crimea. It's just we have ethnic minorities. We have Hungarians, Polish people, Bulgarians. We have Russians. We have Jews. And each of these nationalities has their own states. It's fortunate because, having that for... I am a Jew originally, so people of Jew origin who were here 100 years ago, they were psychologically feeling themselves totally different than I feel. I have no doubts about that, because if there is no thing that are protecting you, then you are living in totally different life. So you are dependent in totally different manner, and this is how Crimean Tatars are addicted to Ukraine, and therefore the obligations are different than to other national minorities in the Crimea, because they are the minority. So still you are saying that it should remain just like it's in the constitution. Well, but the very name Autonomous Republic of Crimea, still those are Soviet rudiments, and the name, the issue of the name, it's part for public discussion, and the major part should vote for that. Even if we are talking about autonomy, this autonomy should have institutionalization, which was never present in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So they should have the control package. If there is some kind of authority in there, it doesn't matter how it is called, the Oblast Council or any other name, it can be only of the two palates, so that the lower palate represents the interest of all the population, and the higher should protect the state interests. If we want, again, to protect the rights of that population. But if we don't want to do that, then we don't need the autonomy at all. And then we are talking about cultural autonomy and so on. We have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to protect the rights of Crimean Tatars in the Crimea, meaning that they are the smallest part of that? I think that we did that. It was the official line for many. Right, if we want to, then we have to create institutions that will protect these rights. That it's not the autonomy for all the citizens of the Crimea, because all the citizens of that have no reasons to be citizens of the autonomy. I mean, from this point of view, Autonomous Republic of Crimea is now different from Kherson or Odessa Oblast. The only difference of the Crimea from Kherson and Odessa Oblast is the Crimean Tatars, and the only difference, then there are no more differences. And if we understand that Crimean Tatars, just as at the time the population of Crimea that refused of their state under the pressure of Russian Empire headed by Catherine II, we have to make this fair. We cannot make it just because, like, Crimean Tatars, they stopped being the state, they stopped being the majority on their own territory, but we can recreate this with the help of the constitution. And from this point of view, the Crimea won't be a bridge between Ukraine and Russia. It has to be a bridge between Ukraine and the world of Turks, Ukraine and Turkey. Now, the Euro region of Ukraine these are different parameters. Now, I mean, like with maybe it's a bridge to Bulgaria and Romania. Yeah, it can be as a territory meeting bridge. It's a part of Euro region. Yeah, economically, of course, but if we are talking about civilization from the point of view of institutions that are ensuring rights of one of the Turks' population, this is the bridge with the other nationalities that are also moving to their own nationality. So we don't have to believe that, like, different countries like Azerbaijan, they have to stay like that always, and they are also our important partner from the point of view of understanding the danger and so on. So this is the bridge, and we have to build that. And you are totally correctly mentioning that it's a Euro region for Bulgaria and so on, but it's a territory on all members of all citizens of the Crimea. They are part of this region. Like, for example, we are not talking about the origin, that it unites people with the origin. No, place of residence. Yeah, I understand your position. I actually share that to some extent, but I guess that now our discussion in the conditions when we did not resolve the key issues and the safety of Crimea, it's a bit early. Yeah, it can be happening, but not on the level of political will, and it's a bit weird, because Crimean Tatars, as far as I know, they are not excited from such discussions, because their goals are totally different, and they go much further than what we discussed. But still, the discussions have to take place, and for sure the priorities have to be in place. So, Mr. Vitaly, ending our discussion, still, interesting moments were there, and I would like to mention that indeed historical examples can be better, or they can be not that good, but we know that phrase that we mentioned, that as you said, that generals and diplomats are always getting ready to the wars of the past. Who said that? I don't remember actually. Yeah, the phrase is very good. And indeed, we need to try to see that from the other angle, in the paradigm of different interests for the future period, and at least to think strategically. In our case, strategically, it's at least half a year before nobody can say how things will end. But what I understood that no matter how ambitious the formula of peace officially is, and the President Zelensky is using that all the time, still, in my opinion, there should be element of the safety of Black Sea, which should be written in a wider context. And there are different types of safety, like food safety and so on, but in the context of freedom of marine navigation, not via ad hoc agreements, some temporary agreements, but via understanding of the action of this rule. It has to be returned, and the freedom of navigation, marine navigation, can be ensured via the presence or either some rocket systems on land, or maybe the ship systems. And there should be not only Ukraine, but maybe some other ships. And we know that now the Black Sea should become the internal sea of NATO. Let us use this kind of formula for the future. I would have agreed with you if not those maneuvers from Georgia. But in the prospect, I guess that the formula is interesting and absolutely correct. There are some details with the entrance of Russian Federation to the Black Sea. Yeah, I think that it's not that a big problem. Let us make it this way: a freedom of marine navigation. Let us say so, because we can be blamed that we want to close the NATO zone to some territories. So the formula of peace. I know your position. I just wanna, mention that there is a part about the safety guarantees. And I know that you are talking about that, and I think that membership in NATO would be a good solution. Yeah, optimal solution, I would say. We don't know whether it will happen this way or not, but as for this formula, there should be also added that what is mentioned actually in recent months by Ukrainian authorities, and much efforts are made. Somebody is talking about Washington summit next year and Vienna summit this year. But ending up, my question is, you've been mentioning many times that the territories can be deoccupied, and I agree that this, so to say, line of conflict, it won't disappear, but at least we can take into account the borders. So these lines were not just built on the map that somebody was drawing them. People were living. There were some villages that were separate. They were coming together. So we are coming to our borders. There is still certain tension. The optimal safety umbrella is NATO. I'd like to also add that probably our own rocket program on rockets for at least like 1,000 kilometers and more. Nobody forbids us to do that. So summing up, how do you think, can we persuade this time our neighbors? We've been talking about some competition moments, our partners, USA, Canada, European partners, that Ukraine now is the country, not the buffer territory, not the gray buffer zone between the NATO bloc and Russia, that this country has to be in the nearest period. We are not talking about dozens of years, part of new geopolitical configuration. Maybe it won't happen fast with the EU. I hope that it will be faster with the NATO, but in the nearest 10 or 15 years, are we going to be inside or still in this or other way we are going to be externally? This is an issue of political will. I think of our political will and Western political will, and I will tell you a funny story. Because recently, like the day before yesterday, I've been writing a good article about relationship of Ukraine with the other country. I said Ukraine is a risk, and I was explaining that this is a risk, but at the same time, why do we have to go for European integration of Ukraine and Euro-Atlantic integration? What are the consequences if the West will not risk? I was writing that in Polish. I was interpreting that, and I decided I wanted artificial intellect to check my grammar. So I put that into the artificial intellect. It is checking, it is reading, so it is fixing some words, it doesn't fix some other, and I see that it's writing, it's adding something to my text. There are Russians and China that are adding. No, it's just writing, adding the text. It wrote a few more passages. Of course, I did not include that into the text, but it started developing, and it wrote that Ukraine is not only a risk, but it's a chance. It wasn't me who wrote that. It was the conclusion of the artificial intelligence. And I think that we should use that. It's a risk. Economical risk, safety risk for the West. We cannot doubt that. But altogether, it's a huge chance, because if we don't use the chance, consequences will be much worse than if you don't want to risk. So this is the conclusion which was made not by me. I don't think that artificial intelligence as of today can think better than the experts and analysts, but the main thing is not to use the simplest solution, even if we take the artificial intelligence as a roadmap for what we should do. So it's totally correct from my point of view. We have to think with the new categories, and also the formula of peace we formulated that we have to add freedom of marine navigation, and we have to have some safety guarantees. And the main thing is the issue about the chance. We are always trying to persuade our partners in this. Here I can agree. The intelligence probably took the opinions of all the Ukrainians. It's very difficult to persuade them that this is a chance. It's not easy. But the fact that these are changes that provide us with opportunities, war is a catastrophe. But in my opinion, that without war with Russia, it was clear that it will happen sooner or later. We couldn't open new chances for Ukraine, and we shouldn't lose them, first of all. And I insist that it's not the issue of years, it's the issue of the nearest time. If right now we won't resolve this issue, I doubt whether somebody will do that instead of us. And it's very important that this passion, this internal unity remains around these goals, because actually it's really hard to explain not only to Europeans but also to Ukrainians why do they have to do this sacrifice. Many people know that, many people understand that, and there is part of people who agrees to live under any conditions in order to have this comes. So I think that we are observing this unexpected situation not only from the point of view of professionality and the good skills of the armed forces, but also the society. We Europeans, and probably we ourselves, did not expect that the society will be so strong. Maybe we also have to take into account the opinion of those who are criticizing that. But I would like to also say that it's hard to be politicians under the conditions of such war. It's uneasy. Of course, this might be the excuse. We are excusing Ukrainian politicians and many things, but nevertheless, our position is noticeable. There are certain mistakes, of course, but the main thing is for this line, this content line, so to say, it should not, right now, it should not go downwards, or backwards. So it's very important so that this works all the time. And our motivation is our people who don't let us stop. I think it's just one of the discussions. There is a lot of things to discuss and some new moments we heard today. And I think that if there is something that can be used, then it's a very useful thing. And not last but not least, I want to thank you. I truly hope that we can continue such discussions. We will see how the situation will develop. I think our position can be edited and these approaches can be changed, but still we have to make some things right now that will start working in a period like of a certain average time perspective, and we should not just observe how the things are going every day. And the main thing is that Ukrainian opinion of the expert and analyst, it should be taken into account in these scenarios, because somehow it is considered that somebody knows better than we do from outside. And it's not like that. So thank you very much, Mr. Vitaly, for discussing uneasy topics. And I think that with your participation and with you, we will find the ability to continue the dialogue.